Listen, have you ever had to face the reality that your good idea may not be a God idea? And even though it was your desire to worship God with your good idea, that you were really worshiping self and promoting your own agenda. It may be that you need deliverance from false worship. And that's what we're going to talk about in living in the supernatural. What's up, WDG fam? So glad to be here with you all. Welcome again to We Desire God Ministries. And you are joining in for another class in living in the supernatural. And I just want to pause here and shout out to all of any newbies, any newcomers, first timers that you have joined us for the first time. I just want to welcome you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And I want to let you know that if you want to get caught up on any lessons in living in the supernatural, any of the previous lessons, go to our contact page and you'll see all the previous videos that you can catch up on. All right, so we're getting ready to jump into it, and we've been doing a series called God Delivers. God delivers. Thank God that He delivers. But today we're going to talk about deliverance from false worship. Yes, deliverance from false worship. And I know many of my Christian brothers and sisters out there, you probably like, hold up. I worship the Most High God. I don't have a problem with false worship. Well, stay tuned because there are many other things that we can worship and put in the place of God. And sometimes we do it and we don't even realize it or recognize it. And so that's what we're going to talk about, deliverance from false worship. And we're still in the book of Daniel. Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, them were some bad brothers. And we're going to come from Daniel chapter 3. And we're going to read verses 1 through 12 because we want to get a picture of how Daniel and the three Hebrew were their men at this time, how they were able to be delivered from false worship. And then we'll jump into what that all entails, okay? So we're going to read from Daniel chapter 3, verse 1 through 12, and I'm reading from the New Living Translation. Y'all ready? All right. Let's go. Daniel chapter 3, 1 through 12. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. That was a big statue. And set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald shouted out, "People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's golden statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. They said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king! You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, look, they ain't nothing but some little tattletales. They just some haters, y'all. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up. Wow, right? I done told y'all before. It is some drama in the Bible. Look at this that's unfolding. Okay, so we discussed in our last lesson how Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were taken from their country, and they came here to learn how to serve this wicked king, King Nebuchadnezzar. So he has this grand idea that he gonna build a statue. Y'all heard that it was 90 feet tall, and was it 9 feet wide? It was huge, right? And so his idea, really, he wanted to be worshipped. That's just the bottom line. And so he created this thing, this gold statue, so that people would bow down, even though they're worshiping the statue. I believe it represented the people worshiping him. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was like, look here. I know that this is what King Nebuchadnezzar has set up, and he done made this grand statue, this golden image, but we not getting ready to bow down and worship no statue. We only worship the true and living God. So the haters, they recognized that they were not bowing down every time they heard these instruments blowing, that they were supposed to bow down, and they refused. And that's what gave me the idea to teach about deliverance from false worship, because everybody was bowing down to this golden image, but they took a stand to say, you know what, that's not what we're going to do. We know whom we serve, and even though everybody else around us, this is what they're doing. Even the big wigs, you heard the scripture said, all the governors, the officials, all the big people in high places, this is what they were doing. This is not what we're about to do. And so it just made me think about our own life, because even though many of us, we profess the name Jesus, we declare that Jesus is Lord over our life, we still at times can have idols, right? We still can have things that we put in the place of God, even good ideas. And that's the hard part, when it's something good, when it's something we think is a good idea, but it's still not what God intended. And so when we think about worship, what is worship? Worship is the honor and reverence to something or someone who we are declaring is superior above all in our life, right? So when we worship God, we are declaring, we're giving him honor, we're giving him reverence, and we're declaring that he is above all, he is superior, he is the number one in our life. And that's huge, right? That's a huge declaration. But sometimes that doesn't always transfer in how we live. We know that we worship God, with our mouth, with our praise. We worship God in prayer. But we also worship God in our works and how we live, right? And so sometimes, if we're not careful, we will put our own idea as looks good, but it's not a God idea. And so That's what I just want to bring to our attention and cause us to reflect and think about, is there anything that created for my life, for my plans for my life, my relationships, my business, my ministry, that is actually a good idea even to everybody else, but it's not a God idea. And so the first point that I want to stress to you is that false worship is the creation of ideas apart from God's purpose. False worship is the creation of ideas apart from God's purpose. Now, we know this is one of the first commandments that God gave the children of Israel. You should have no other gods before me. You should not create golden images. You should not worship idols. So clearly, that what King Nebuchadnezzar had did was outside of God's purpose. God never had in mind a purpose that people would worship idols, statues, or kings, but God was the only one to be worshiped. And so we oftentimes, I can even remember just several things, even, when I was younger, I remember just having a crush on someone who I grew up, a young man who I grew up with. And nobody could tell me in my mind, I thought I was going to marry him. I had just created this whole thing, this whole story in my mind that we were going to get married. Now that, of course, this was long before I met my husband. And even that's a story because, I, it took somebody who I was working with, a older gentleman by the name of Chuck. Shout out to Chuck. He's always been a big integral part of how me and my husband came together because I was in a relationship. Now, the guy wasn't a bad guy, but it wasn't God's man that he had for me. He just wasn't. And when Chuck, when he found out that my husband, what type of guy he was, that he was a guy that loved God, that he was a preacher, and Chuck knew who I was, he was like, oh man, it was Holy Spirit just gave him the discernment. And he would talk to me and was like, I think you should really go out with Steve. And I wasn't checking for my husband. I was like, look, I'm already in a relationship because I had already created, something in my own mind. But when God revealed to me that my husband was my husband, listen, that's all it took. And the rest was history. And so it even reminds me of the Tower of Babel, when they had this grand idea to build this tower up to heaven. But God didn't tell them to build no tower to heaven. And what God did was he confused the languages. He confused their language. And it might be that you're confused because God has allowed you to be in a place of confusion because you're creating things that is outside of his will. Even though it's a good idea, even though everybody else is saying, you and Ray, y'all would be good together. you know, Even though everybody else is saying, man, this is the career move for you. Man, you about to be promoted, you about to make all this money, but is it a God idea? Is God going to be glorified? I mean, you know, I have so many stories, even my husband, when we were first married, and he was so good at his job, and he worked in HVAC, and they were creating a position for him, in another state where he would be a manager. But he came to a crossroads because Holy Spirit began to pull on his heart. And even though it was a good idea, it wasn't a God idea. So remember, false worship is the creation of our own ideas apart from God's purpose. It could be a good idea, but we want to be in God's idea. The second point I want to bring to you that false worship is exalting our own ideas above God's. And, we could see this clearly with King Nebuchadnezzar. He wanted to be exalted. And it was like he was overcompensating. I mean, nothing you can create can compare to God. So he created this statue 90 feet tall. What? But still, it couldn't compare to God. And sometimes we can create ideas and visions for our life, and it seems so great and wonderful, and we begin to exalt that above God. But nothing can take the place of God. Nothing can take the place of his purpose. And it really reminds me of Lucifer. When he was created to be the light bearer, to carry the light of God's glory. But then there was a shift where he decided, you know what? I think it'd be a good idea if I would be worshiped. And he began to talk this foolishness where he was going to exalt his throne above God's. And of course, God wasn't having that, right? But we can often do that in our own life. We can begin to exalt our own ideas above God. And this is one thing I also begin to ponder and learn about, that even though sometimes the idea comes from God, that we can even exalt the purpose that we want God to bring this thing to pass. It could really be distorted, where we begin to exalt the purpose of even proving our self-worth to people, our doubters, our haters, or just people who have misunderstood us. And one thing I begin to understand about God is, even if you are moving in the direction of the God idea, if your if your purpose is tainted, where you begin to exalt you being lifted up, and people glorifying you, or people what's the word I'm looking for? People begin to esteem you. You begin to exalt God promoting you because you want people to validate you that thought you were crazy for moving how you move, for doing the things that you do. God will still not allow you to move into your purpose fully, because you that has to be purified, because the focus now is not on God being worshiped, but you being worshiped. Yeah. And this is a real thing, because it hurts when you're misunderstood. It hurts when God calls you to do a thing, but other people don't understand, and they think you're stupid. They think you're foolish. They think you have lost your mind. So we have to be careful that we don't even exalt, that's wanting to be validated from other people above wanting to see God exalted, God worshiped as he brings us into our purpose. All those things are important. So we have to remember that we cannot allow pride to be exalted, even when we're on the road to actually fulfilling our God-given assignment. God will not allow us to move fully into it until our intentions are purified. And lastly, the last point I want to make is that true worship is defined by God. At the end of the day, God is God. And we don't get to tell God what pleases him. We don't get to tell God what's best for our life. Remember, worship is honor and reverence. For when we're worshiping God is honor and reverence and respect for him, saying that he's superior, that he is Lord over our life. So even if it's a good idea, if it does not bring God glory, we don't get to tell God that this is true worship. I love the story. I think John 4, the story about the woman at the well, it really paints this picture very well, with the woman at the well when Jesus was talking to her. And then she began to tell Jesus about what she knew about worship. And she was saying, that the Jews would worship in this certain location at the mountain. And Jesus was telling her, listen, true worship, basically, he was telling her true worship is not limited to a location, but God is looking for those who will worship him in spirit and in truth. So we really have to get God's truth. We really have to know God's perspective, or else we will find ourselves being duped in saying that all our good deeds, or our good plans, because they're good, that is true worship. And true worship is defined by what God is requiring of us at every season of our life. What he required of you last year, what he required of you last week might not be what he's requiring of you now. Just like Abraham. Abraham, he was required to have faith for the promised son, Isaac. But guess what? Then he believed God. He tripped up along the way, but he believed God. And he saw God bring Isaac. He saw God allow his wife, Sarah, to give birth to Isaac. But guess what? Then at the another season, God required Abraham to sacrifice Isaac on the altar. So as time went on, God was requiring something different. And we could get stuck in what God required from us before. But now he may be requiring something different. And that's why I'm stressing the point that true worship is defined by God. God is the one who says that our worship is pleasing to him, because what pleases him is our obedience, what he's asking us to do in this season. And I love the woman at the well. You know what? She didn't get offended. She didn't get offended when she was trying to explain to Jesus what she knew about worship. And he began to tell her what true worship is, worshiping the Father in spirit and in truth. She went in the neighborhood, she ran and told the men, look, I've met someone who I believe is the Christ, because he told me everything that I did. Because remember, Jesus, he, began to tell her about her life, and, how she was involved with multiple men who were not her husband. She didn't even get offended. She recognized something that we need to recognize, that true worship, true intimacy with God is allowing him to check us, allowing him to check us, and allowing him to tell us what is required of us, what we've done wrong, how we've got off track, and not being offended. Because we, as I said, we might think that what we're offering to God is good. But if it's not bringing us closer to God's purpose, then it's not true worship. It's not true worship. So that's it, y'all. We just want to make sure that our hearts are pure, that we are, as Romans 12:1 and 2, that's one of my favorite scriptures. It says that as we offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, that we will be able to prove what is his good, acceptable, and perfect will. And so, we're living sacrifices. The animal sacrifices, they couldn't say nothing. They couldn't say, no. They couldn't scream. They couldn't yell because they was dead. But we're still living. And so our desires and things that are, screaming, that that wants to be exalted above God's, we have to kill that thing. We're living sacrifices. But if we do that, even when we get off track, we will know. God would allow us to know what is His good, acceptable, and perfect will. So I love you. And I pray that something I shared resonated with you, hit home with you all. Please like and share this video with your friends, your family, your co-workers, everybody. And leave us a comment. I would really love to know how you were triggered after hearing this lesson. What did God bring to your attention as a result of listening to this lesson? So leave us a comment. And if you have any questions, you can email us at preacher1473@manofgodllc.com. So send us any questions you may have, and don't forget to subscribe, y'all, because I don't want y'all to miss out on any of the videos, any of the lessons that we put out. So please don't forget to subscribe. I love you. God bless you. Until the next time.